today is going to be kind of an advanced day. It's a really awesome day because we have a guest speaker here today. Now, before we go to the guest speaker, let's cover some housekeeping first. As a reminder, we are broadcasting in 1080 high definition to Twitch and to YouTube simultaneously. You can ask questions in both locations, and if you see me, might be demoing, although Calvin's mostly demoing today. I'll be talking to folks over here. As a reminder, keep in mind there's a solid 1 minute or so delay, maybe even a little bit more than that. Right now I'm looking at it, it's about a minute with YouTube and about a minute 10 minute 10 with YouTube and about a minute with Twitch. So understand that when you type something, we will see it immediately, but our response on video will be delayed about that long. So it makes kind of an awkward conversation. It's just the way the streaming works in the world. As a reminder, we highly recommend that you if you want to support the channel, support the fact we're providing daily live training, I highly recommend that you check out our live training right here. This is our recorded training courses are available for purchase, and that's what you can see right here. If you go to fmtraining.tv, when you come to this web page right here, press the bundle button. So the live training is what we're doing right now. This is the current schedule down here, as you can see this. Tomorrow, we'll talk about that in a second, but this is the live training here, and then you can come to the bundle right here, and you can purchase a complete bundle if you need a copy of FileMaker Pro to go with your training, along with all the tools we have and the enhanced version of our FM Starting Point CRM. And so if you want a discount on these prices, send an email to support@RC Consulting, and I will send you a coupon that will, or my coaching team will send you a coupon for about $50 off. If you're a beginner person, it might be a little overwhelming for you. Definitely sit in and watch it, ask questions, but it's definitely kind of an advanced topic because we are talking today about pivot tables. Pivot tables is like doing unnatural things with FileMaker. They always I was just watching the last Star Wars movie again, and they were like, the path to the dark side is a way of, what do they rephrase, doing unnatural things with the Force or whatever, unnatural things. And so pivot tables are definitely a Sith level unnatural thing act with FileMaker, right? So that's what I consider. Now, of course, it could be very important to you in your business, but it is a little bit deeper, right? So Calvin, we want to go to Calvin. Are you there, Calvin?
I'm here.
All right, so
I am here.
That is not your face.
I am caffeinated.
What do you look like?
Oh,
what's your face look like? See, I don't see your face. There's Calvin's face.
I'm here. I am caffeinated.
He is caffeinated. That's right. You always need someone here to kind of help you along with the TV part of this. Like, go live to Calvin. Where's Calvin's face? We have no idea. So once again, if you have questions, there's about a minute delay, but I will be on the keyboard answering questions and feeding them to Calvin. So Calvin, you ready to go?
I'm ready.
All right. So flip the screen. What are we doing today?
So today we're talking about pivot tables and virtual lists. And just to recap, we want to start back on and the last look at the file we demoed last time I was here, and kind of remind us what pivot tables are, what a virtual list is, and how we can use those together to create something, some dynamic reporting in FileMaker. So again, what is a virtual list? It's a list of data that we stick in a global field or a variable that we can reference and display different places. So in this simple demo, we've got one field that has a list of names, and we display them on the screen. We can change that to display states, and we're displaying them here. And we can use it to display types. And all of this is pointing to the same table. It's displaying in the same portal, but because it's a virtual list, we're changing and what we're seeing, and because it's based on global fields, what one person sees in their session with FileMaker Pro is not the same as what somebody else sees in their session of FileMaker Pro when it's hosted on the server. People see can see different data analyzed. Why would we do this? What's the use case? There's not a lot of seeing something in a portal like this isn't necessarily.
Yeah, hey Calvin, right now this really sucks so far. People are going to hang up and leave the broadcast if you don't make this relevant.
Okay.
You got to make it relevant, baby.
Here's the relevance. So by putting it in those fields that we can store it, Then we can use it to create something like these charts. And in the other demo that I showed, we can generate reports. And if we see here is a very helpful financial report covering several years. And you can just, by changing the scripting, changing what's saved in that field, you can change what's displayed on the report. So if we go back to our data field where everything's saved, here's that list of data that is in this global field that we're referencing to display in this virtual list.
So if I was to summarize this, we're kind of doing lateral sub-summaries. Where people do sub-summaries, normally they're vertical. These are, a pivot table typically takes things that normally we would be organized kind of up and down. So you'd have a sub-summary here and a sub-summary here. And that's kind of the normal FileMaker behavior. But FileMaker doesn't have the ability to sub-summarize laterally, right? And so that's where the pivot, because we're taking something that would be organized this way and we're turning it and pivoting it this way. Does that make sense, everyone? So I've drawn all over the screen now.
Yeah, so there's not really a built-in way to display data like this, where laterally, like you say, as far as, especially for financial data. And when lots of times we want to see it grouped by month or by quarter. And I had another report over here, sales stats by year and quarters. And just we're referencing the same fields that we're referencing over here, but we just change the data and we calculate it differently. And the script is running and summarizing it by quarter instead of by month. And but either way, we're able to summarize that in the way we want, and then just by displaying it in one layout or another, we can see those differences. So see those reports. So this is kind of the basic, the first step of understanding and using pivot tables, and which brings us to the next level of making some dynamic tables. One person pointed out last time when we were displaying this is that each of these my columns up here, January, February, March, etc., are all hard coded. And so I can't, if I open up two windows here and display my and run a report on the quarter, if I look at this over here, it makes sense and it's correct because I'm looking at it in the correct layout, and my scripting tells me to go to which layout the data will make sense. But if I left this open, it doesn't make sense here because I'm looking at quarterly data under a columns for the months. So that we can take this to another level where we dynamically change these column headers to show to dynamically change and make something that's a lot more flexible. So let's look at this new chart or a new demo file that we have, and that's not it. Here we go, and it's right here. And so we have a list of data, and here we've made it dynamic. So we can select whether we want to report on the total, the cost, the margin, or the count. I'm going to say total. And then let's say we want to group it by month and by account. And we'll see here that it's taking the data that we have up here and breaking it out into this area and the footer dynamically. Now, let's say I want to change it so I want to see the stats by project. And so I just changed it to project, and all of the stats changed. Let's say I want to say project and account. And so you'll notice there, unlike that other example that I showed where we had a month for every column and we couldn't change that unless we changed the layout, here I just selected that I want the columns to be accounts and the rows to be based on project, and it changed that. Just by selecting the differences. There was a trigger that ran a script and calculated that and made the update. So I could say maybe I want my rows by the month, and here now we're seeing rows down. Our rows are the summaries by month, and then our our columns are by account. So we got this really awesome flexible way of changing the data that we're looking at. And so how do we do that? Let's go ahead and open up our script debugger and just walk through and see what's going on here. So I'm going to let's go into let me go ahead and select, I want columns by month and rows by account. Let's do that. And we're going to still total this by total. And so first of all, we're defining what our row labels and our column labels are. Let's go ahead and run those and see what we have. And and one thing about this particular demo is all of the virtual lists are saved in global variables, not in fields.
Okay, so and that I'm going to interrupt real quick because I've been over here. My fingers are like at warp 9. You can hear me banging on the keyboard. People are asking how you collect the data, and so you collect the data with a virtual list. We had the virtual list conversation is a 2-day conversation we had. So the pivot table is like people say we did a video on like what is a virtual list, and you do the virtual list, and then you go, well, why is that relevant? Why do I care? Virtual list, once again, if I can find my samples, where's my little thing here? All right, here we go. I'm going to switch to me real quick here. I'm going to explain this. This is really kind of important. So a virtual list is this. It's a screwdriver. It's a tool. And so people say, well, so we had 2 sessions for 2 days, about 2 hours, where we talked about what is a screwdriver and how do you use it and how do you make it work. And then people go, well, so what? Well, this is the so what part. What can you do with a screwdriver? You could do almost anything with it. It's one tool in your toolbox. It's not all the tools. So it's a good tool to have. You can use it on a bunch of different things. One of the things you can do with it is a virtual list, right? So Calvin could probably, before the day is over, kind of go back and show how he collects the data. But to really deep dive into that, I put the video links onto the Twitch side. If the folks over there have the same question, I will put that over on the YouTube side as well. But that's that makes sense, Calvin? People are asking about that.
Yeah, so the great question. I think for those other demos, I'll just let those sit. The way we're collecting the data in this demo is a little similar, but because it's dynamic, then I do want to show how we're doing that just based on selections in the fields. We're changing how that script runs to collect the data. And so that's one of the important parts. But as far as how you collect the data, you can use an SQL select statement. You can use finds and loops. You can use you can just grab. There was one app someone showed me this last week where they were pulling data down with a API to get financial data for the stock market, and then putting that in FileMaker and showing that in a graph. And so that where the data comes from is not irrelevant, but we can collect that data in any way. How do you think we should collect it? There's more than one way to skin a cat.
Okay, so I'm going to keep interrupting as we go, since we're in interrupt mode just briefly here.
Yeah.
And once again, if you folks remind me when you have really cool call signs, what your name is. So Skane101 is asking, and I know all you folks, this is a lot to do a broadcast and to press the buttons and then to remember everyone's name at the same time. Like I said, I'm not the smartest person. That we were asking that earlier. I'm not the smartest person in the room. I'm just the guy working the hardest. So he has asked a question, what is the script trigger Calvin is using on object save, etc.?
Yes. So you could use on object save or on object modify, but these are all on object save. So no, it's on object modify. But in either case, it would work. But I guess on object modify, because we're using a popover menu, so the on object modify works just fine. Let's go back to our script though, and run this again. I'll select there. And so first of all, we're grabbing the row and column labels. Let me go ahead and run those steps and see what these labels are. So we've got our row labels, which are the accounts, and then then let's look at our column labels, which is our months.
And just interject, that is a virtual list right there, everyone. So
Yeah.
that is that tool. The virtual list is nothing more than a list, and it's virtualized because we have to actually kind of forcibly construct it. So.
Right, and the other idea of the virtual list is it's not really the table that we use to display the data isn't storing the data. It's pulling data from somewhere else or summarizing it and then displaying it. So in this case, so we have our column, our rows, which are the accounts, our columns, which are the months, and then now that we have these two lists, we're going to run the script, the generate virtual lists, which is going to generate more lists based to get those summaries across those two the columns and rows. So we'll just kind of walk through and see what happens here. The first thing we're going to do is track these attributes, which is the rows and the columns, which we selected as account and month. If we look at what these, you'll see we're tracking which field, though, we're basing these on. There's a selection option, which you'll see I selected account, but now this attribute variable is pointing us to account name. And now we have the aggregate, which is what the total is pointing to. It's telling us, let's look at the total, order total price, which corresponds with this total price column right here. And now we're going to clear our global variables that are currently being used just so that we know that we don't have any old data messing things up. And now we start this loop process. And what's really cool about this is that you'll see in this loop that it's not everything that's dealing with is in those variables and grabbing those stats. It's not looping through records, and it's not looping from one layout to another, which can slow things down. And so it's pretty fast here. And so so here we're getting our maximum numbers, our column max and our row max, and that's just telling us how many times we can run the loop before we need to exit. If you're looping through records, saying go to record next, you can have exit after last, which is really good to use if you're doing that. In this case, we aren't looping through the records, so we can't use the exit after last. We have to exit if our count has exceeded the max. So it goes through and it starts putting together these variables. And we'll see here, we have set variable. We're actually using a variable in the variable name. So if you look at COL for column, the number's 1, and we're setting the variable pivot data and then that repetition number. So in this case, we just cleared the value, but let's go ahead and go back over here, and we'll see that it runs a execute SQL select statement, and we're not going to look at that right now, to gather the data that to gather the data from the table and put it into the virtual list. And here we're going to start generating these pivot data columns. So now that we have our columns and our rows, we need to generate that data.
Okay, Calvin, I want to interrupt. So people are asking about the sample file right here. Can you do me a favor and just quit sharing your screen briefly with me and then drag? And how big is this file? Pretty small? How big is that?
It's a full copy of FM starting point.
It's about 30 or 40 megs. Can you do me a favor and just drag that to my Slack right now? Because what I'm going to do is I'm going to post it for everyone while we're waiting for this to happen, right? I'm going to get rid of that. Put that over here. Get rid of all the mayhem. I'm going to post that for everyone here. And then keep in mind that Calvin removed a lot of the SQL out of this one. So there's really two different versions of this file. We wanted to make sure... there's still SQL in this one. I thought we removed a lot of it, right?
So this one doesn't have any of it removed, and I'll show you once we get to the end of looking at that script.
Okay.
I'll show you why that's an issue. And I have it working a second way as well.
Okay, so is this the same file that we had already posted then? This one that you're showing right now?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay, that one I have. I need the non-SQL one. They dropped me that one. It'd be great.
Okay. And I haven't opened. I haven't made any changes to that one. We haven't looked at that one yet.
Right, but I'm going to go ahead and post it so when people listen, because you start showing it in 2 seconds, and I get 12 people wanting to know where the sample file is. So it's just the way they're very greedy here, and they want what they want, and they don't want to wait. Scott says, is the layout he is using to display the data a different context table from where the data's come from? See, that's the
yes.
Yes, and that gets back to the SQL issue, because the SQL was kind of taking us out of context. It's a little bit funky, right? And so once again, we have to think about when we do stuff like this, we have to think about, I mean, it's one thing just to do it and make it work, and then it's something else to try to explain it, and not just like explain it, like throw it out there. Like you'll go to DevCon sometimes, like developers conference, you'll watch people who teach content, and you could tell that they just crawl out from under a rock or something. They have never trained anyone in their lives. I've seen some really horrific presentations before, and so to actually create the content so it can be digested and explained to people is tricky. And so that's kind of what we are adjusting. So Calvin, if you've sent that to me, did you send that? The SQL lesson?
Yep.
Okay, go ahead. I'm going to go ahead. Okay, it's right here. I'm going to go ahead and tell it to download, and I'll take care of that on the other screen. So we're going to resume to your explanation. And then, so Scott picked up on the SQL issue, which was the context funkiness that was going on, right? So
yeah, so the if we look at that script one more time, we'll see that it's based on the fields that or on the data here. It is running an SQL for each data point, for each account in the found set and each month in the found set. Now, if one of the accounts isn't in there, so for example, let's go ahead and remove Walmart. And so I'm going to update this, and you'll notice Walmart just disappeared and is not in there. Let's go, Command J will bring everything back, and I'll do that again, and you'll see it's there. But what if I only remove part of this? So we've got this one really big item here for nearly $5,000. I'm going to remove that, and I'm going to refresh this. And you'll notice that our stats didn't change here. Now, if I sort by date, we'll see January 2019. We've got one record, and that doesn't look like $5,000 to me. And the reason why it's working that way is that we are using XQSQL. We're using the context of the layout to generate our finds, but then we're using XQSQL to perform the finds. And XQSQL, the script step in FileMaker called XQSQL is not bound by the context of the layout you're in. And so that's a double-edged sword, you might say. And it can be good or it can be bad. And in this case, if I look at this invoice data, I want to see a summary at the bottom of the invoice data that I'm looking at. I don't want to see all the invoice data. And we're kind of getting this blended result. And so that's where that next sample file comes in, which uses a different method to gather that data.
I like that blended result. I very much like that. That's very cool.
Yeah, so it's using the context to generate the find, but then it's using everything to generate the result, which is so it's kind of confusing, and if you don't know what's going on, you could think something's messed up with your data. So it goes through and it loops through. If we want to look at this, finish looking at the script here, it loops through each of these columns. For each row, it loops through each column and generates this list of data. So you'll see we've got pivot data, and because there's no 1 in there, we know that's repetition 1. We've got repetition 2, repetition 3. And each of these global variables stores the data for one of these columns. So you'll see pivot data 1 has $33 and then 0, 0, 0. So we got zeros. Pivot data 2 has 0, 200, 0, 0 right there. Pivot data 3 has 0 and then 1900, 0, 0. And you'll see in this case, there's only one value in each month. But this loop goes through and generates, based on what those maximum values are, as many pivot data global variables as are needed for the report. So let's go ahead and finish this up. It puts the data together, and then it loops through and generates our pivot data here. And finally, it will save the results and refresh the window. And that gives us that result. So the way that we generate this data is through SQL select statement and a loop within a loop. So for each column, or there's a loop for each column, and within each column there's a loop for each row. And so that's how we're generating that. You could use finds, and that would be one way of doing it as well. So as I said, that blended result was a little confusing. So I went through and put together another sample to kind of make this a little easier to get the result I wanted. So in this case, now if you remember before, I removed that Walmart option, that Walmart, this is the same data set. I removed that Walmart order for 5,000. Here it is right here. And it didn't remove from my results. So let me go ahead and I'll select total. And again, we have accounts down the side and months as columns, but these can be, obviously these can be changed just like the other one. And in this case, I'm going to say, let's remove this $5,000 order right here from the found set. So I didn't delete it, I just selected Command T to omit it. And I want this result down here to reflect that change. Let's go ahead and select total and see if it updates. Okay, now you'll see that the January value changed. And now instead we just have this one order for $199 that appeared. So in this case, how are we doing it? Again, it's a loop within a loop, but instead of looping through, doing that XQSQL, we are looping through each record. So here, I tell it to, first of all, I sort the records, and then I tell it to go to the first record and start looping through and putting together the data in a JSON object. So let's go ahead and watch this happen. And the only reason I use JSON is just to just as a way to store the data. And I'll select the I'm gathering the row label and the column data the same way as the other one. The only reason I'm sorting it is so that the data is in the order that I want to see it. And so if we look at our row labels, we have the same columns, the same accounts, and our column labels, where did that variable go? Here's our column labels, the same months. And now I'm navigating to the first record. And in this case, we will loop through each record and use this set variable to create a JSON object. So right in here, we'll see our JSON object is empty. And when I say set variable, it looked at that first record and said, okay, this is the month of July 2017, The account is Richard Carlton Consulting, and the value is 33. And then it goes to the next one and sees that this is a different month. So we've got a different month, a different account, and a different value. And now when we go to, let's go ahead and move to where we will have a second one. So now this time we have a second Costco value for a different month. Let's see if we have, do we have any that are the same month? Looks like Domino's, we'll have a duplicate month on Domino's when we get there. So I'm just looping through these records. This is probably not as fast as the execute SQL version, but it's giving me the data I want, so I'm willing to wait a little bit for it. Okay, so here we have this April one here. Let's go ahead and look at what our JSON looks like. We've got April. Domino's is $500. Someone had a good time at Domino's.
Say it.
Okay, so now instead of adding another value here, it just increased the Domino's value by $100 because it knew that it was the same month. The month and account were matched, so it just increased that by the value of the next record. Now, if I continue, I'll just say go to the end. At the end, it just saves and commits the record, saves the data and refreshes the window so we see that value. And now all of our, in this case, instead of having a return delimited list to save our virtual list, we are using a JSON object to save the list. And if we want to see that in a way that looks a little more readable, just for the viewing, we can say JSON format elements, and this is just a global variable called JSON, and you can see it broken out here. And you'll notice that it's actually in alphabetical order. It's not in the order that we want to display it, but because of the way we're calculating that, we put it in the order that we want based on the columns and the rows. So that was a different way that we put the data together, and based on the current found set, which gives us a better representation, a better summary at the bottom. And again, we can change this and loop it so instead it's rows of months and columns of accounts. And in that case, we'll see in the data viewer that our JSON's just structured in the opposite, grouping things by account first.
Well, people are definitely chiming in here. Some of the people, I think Elzo says he prefers the non-SQL version. Although we are going to have our SQL session where we're going to do execute SQL for beginners in the FileMaker platform. We're going to be doing that. Actually, I don't know when that's scheduled. It wasn't on the calendar. It must be further out. That's a good question. But yeah, Calvin's going to be coming back for that. We're all going to get our SQL training wheels and kind of tutor around on SQL, which will be fun. But it has its uses. But then for training, keep in mind it can have an abstracted context, which is why Calvin just did this on his own, and because he knows that a lot of us here don't necessarily want to go down that road. Some of you obviously love SQL, but it's one of those kind of things. I am looking for the updated broadcast schedule. I'll be working on that. Calvin, any questions, folks? It's kind of quiet. They posted your sample file, by the way, Calvin. So this new one here, they have it now, so they can press that and get all that information. Don't do that. Have you tried it with 50,000 records in the data set, and is it not slow?
I would imagine that if you had 50,000 records, it would be slow, especially since you're looping through. And FileMaker doesn't handle the JSON as quickly as it handles return delimited list. If that were if you were going to do it with that many records, you'd probably no matter what way you were doing it, you'd probably want to analyze that data on the server.
Yeah. Can I make a suggestion? This gets back to a lot of these videos are kind of cross piling on top of each other here, and I don't mean whoops. I don't know. You still hear me? Hopefully I didn't sit on.
I still hear you.
Ah, good. My microphone is misbehaving. So, what's interesting about this is that, and Calvin, show your face for a second. We're gonna have a quick chat about this. So, a lot of the questions here are interlapping and interrelating kind of situations. It's a situation where there he is. I'll make a smiling face. The situation is that you got virtual lists, which is once again our tool that we need, right? So here's our tool, right? And then we also have the issue with charting, which we ran into the same thing, and that's a really great point by Peter. And the issue is that when you start trying to do live real-time churning of large calculations, you have to cache that data. The data has to be pre-calculated. So you could send it to server, and that could help you in some situations, but realistically, at the end of the day, you can overwhelm the server too. And so what you want to do is you really want to be able to cache the data. And so in our charting videos, if you go back and watch our charting video, which I'll find the link for, but Calvin did a really great job with charting, is that charts are fundamentally items that suck to process in real time, because really charting typically, to really dig the data out, it's 50,000, 100,000 records. So Peter totally understands the issue here. And Execute SQL won't fix the problem, because Execute SQL doesn't do anything natively faster than FileMaker can do already. Execute SQL does allow you to look at data and create kind of temporary ad hoc relationships with FileMaker and extract things out of context. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, it's not going to find and report the data faster than what you could do with FileMaker. It might be simpler in terms of lines of code, right? But it's not going to be magically faster. As a reminder, for those of you who have not seen this or talked about this, I talked to the engineers who wrote this, and they the same people that Nick worked with, right? I get to talk to them randomly. Nick actually got to work with them for years, and they were always perplexed by people that were in love with the Execute SQL statement, because for them they did it to help, make people happy, but they didn't understand it because they had to write. They actually wrote the code to make it work. They have to take the SQL. They see the code, then they have a translator that translates it into like normal FileMaker English, right? There's no Execute SQL engine in there. There's no SQL engine in FileMaker. So it translates it to FileMaker, then it does the work, then it translates it back to SQL and passes it back. So it's actually technically slower. And so understand that it's just a different way, a different context, but at the end of the day, you're going to get to an issue where you got to cache the data, and the report can do it for you. For example, I have reports that, like, a lot of you see emails from me once or twice a week, depending upon the situation. Every email that we send out is customized to the person based upon whether they bought memberships. If you've already bought a membership or subscription, it customizes, says, hey, you got so many days left, thank you for your support. If you haven't bought any of our training, then it says, hey, maybe you should support the channel, right? But if I want to do reporting on that, I'm sending out upwards of 60,000 emails a week, and if I want to see what we've done over the last year and kind of trend that, way too many. We're talking millions of records, right? So the reality is that we have to run the report, cache it. It takes the final results and puts them into either JSON or a virtual list, not in a variable. We actually save that into a preferences table, right? Calvin, you want to address that briefly, the idea of that?
Yeah, so the sample that we just looked at, we're saving everything in global variables. But if you're going to have something work on the server, and some of these reports are so big that it takes some of the reports will take hours to put together if it's complicated enough. And so you want the server working on it, and you don't want to sit there waiting for it. So you just you would have that run, and when it's done running, it would save the data into a field in preferences, or sometimes I've seen this dedicated report table where the results are saved once a week into the report table, and you can see what happened that week. And so that way it's cached and it's not calculating the data. So just looking at the already calculated data is really fast. But that process of calculating it, you want to let that be handled on a worker machine or a server or a robot machine that kind of works on its own. and then save it somewhere where you can access it later. So you don't sit there watching your time, your hourglass spin on your computer.
So Calvin, I mean, we can let you pick it back up, but the conversation about performance, super relevant, because I hate things that you teach someone to do something, they promptly put it into action with 100,000 records, and it goes off the cliff, and they go, oh, Richard sucks because it goes so slow. Or more likely what will happen is that if you build things like this that get slow for a customer, they will say either Fred Smith, the developer, sucks, or they will say FileMaker sucks. FileMaker doesn't suck. It just has magical, it's a magical tool that has limits. It's like, the Harry Potter wand. It's only good for so many whatevers. And so you need to find a way to make it fast even when it doesn't want to be fast because you're asking it to do too much math at one time. So, cool. All right, so we beat that. Oh, Elza says, what would you say is safe number of records to use? Anytime I'd be doing more than a couple thousand, I'd get, you'll see it. But anytime I do more than a couple thousand records in real time with charting and stuff, anything more than that, because even with starting point, like when you pop starting point open, right? This is a big part. I mean, let me go and show my desktop again. But we have starting point over here. Come back over here. Here's a new starting point. We'll say basic, and then these charts right here. These charts are cached. The data is cached. There's videos in here on how we do it. It's the same thing that Calvin already did. So I anticipated in advance that people would have lots of invoices and and that's why it's scalable. So we built it. Now these charts are cached from a previous set of data. So then when we ship it, we give you the cached data. If you actually come down here and hit run update, there's no data in here. It's going to go really fast and run updates, and it's not going to show anything because there's no data in the system. When you download the starting point, it's kind of empty, right? So that's why we ship it. We show you what it could look like, and then of course, then that's what we have right now. So that's the idea with that. So Calvin, I'm going to make you full screen. Go back to your desktop if you want. Cool. Peter seems happy with the answer. I mean, we beat it to death a little bit, but performance is such a big deal. I mean, all this none of this matters if it's so slow that it what was that line? It's, and I'm not, well, I don't want to say, it used to be, someone said, the funniest line one time, it was in a book somewhere, and it said, it sucks so bad, it's like sucking dead bunnies through a straw, right? I just can't even imagine what that would be like. And of course, then we have Bunny over here. So we're not talking about a person named Bunny. We're talking about little furry animals through a straw. It's just horrible. And so anyway, yeah, so if the performance is that bad, then you don't want to use it, even if it's beautiful, right? So anyway.
Yes, the original app that ran those charts that I put together for that chart demo, they have something like 1 million records in their projects table that they're doing the reporting on. So we ended up and it would take too long. Just for the speed test, I did run it on a machine one time locally just to see how long it would take. But then running that on the server was it was just a couple seconds, and so it wasn't a huge wait on the server, and they didn't feel like they were waiting all day to get their reports. So anything larger than anything that'd be too large to handle locally would be, you could either do some scripted process that runs every so often, or use PSOS or something like that.
All right, cool. And I did not make up the dead bunny straw thing. That was already online. You can look that up. All right, Calvin, what else you got?
If we want, we can look at look at the table behind the virtual list reporting that we have here. It's essentially the same as the one over in my other sample, except that we're also selecting the column names as well. So we go to pivot table, and we'll have this. We have our column labels and a summary for our totals, and then our global selection fields, and then everything is the calculation that pulls the data out of that JSON is this row table. So we're looking based on the column label and the row label. We are selecting which object in that, which data point in the JSON objects that we want, and then we are putting that as the result that we'll see in the field. And the reason why we have this case statement is we're just making sure that if there's no data to show, we're not showing any data, and if the value is 0, we show 0 instead of just empty. Since we're talking about, in this case, they're all currency values, money values. So that's what that is doing, and which is pretty much the same as the other sample. The relationship that we're using here is pretty simple as well. If we look at this, it's just ID constant to ID constant, and this Cartesian option, so we see all the records. And any empty lines that, because there's only 4 rows, we only see 4 rows. But if there are more, and we see all the records, I think the table probably has 100 records or something in it, just for the sake of having it. Yeah, 100 records. And so that's kind of what's going on behind the scenes to generate these stats.
All right, I have asked people if they have any questions because we're kind of coming up at the end of our hour here. We spent about the first, what did we spend about the first 5, 6, 7 minutes doing the housekeeping, which always seems to be an important part of this. Once again, reminder that support the channel, buy our training. We really appreciate it. It doesn't cost much, and you keep Calvin fed, which is always a good thing, right, Calvin?
That's right. So one thing we could do, let's try, I'm going to duplicate this one and open this copy up and import a ton of records and see what happens. I think my chart demo has, or no, my other virtual list demo, this one has a ton of records. So we'll go File, Import, see if we can, how fast it is with a bunch of records. And we'll say desktop, pivot table, and we want this first virtual list demo. And we're going to go invoices to invoices, and we're going to match the names, which it did automatically. I'll say import. And I didn't have anything. I need to, I've got 6,000 records.
Oh, party foul. You got to mute your phone.
Okay, let's go import one more time.
Oh, Calvin.
Let's try this. Okay, invoices. So we got our 6,000. We'll see how fast it does 6,000 records.
So not necessarily blindingly, right? So. You there, Calvin?
Yes. I turned off my notifications on the computer, but I forgot to silence the cell phone.
Yeah, no, I understand how that is. I had to do mine too.
Okay, we're just about done with this import, and we'll see how long this takes. I suspect that it 6,000 records, it's going to take way too long, or longer than it should, but we'll see. Or longer than would be usable.
Yeah, I mean.
But the idea was that you wouldn't be doing the reporting on the entire found set or the entire data set. You would be doing a search and then wanting to see maybe on a given company or something what the result was. Now it looks like the only thing we have is cost data. So I'm going to base this on cost, and we'll say, oh, and it's already running. So let's see.
Ugh. All right.
Okay. Cost and account. Oh, we don't have any account in here. That's the problem.
Yeah, but it's chewing. So yeah, you're at the 5,000, 6,000 record level, and it's kind of unwieldy. And so once again, that gets back to my idea that you want to limit. I think it was Elzo asking that, but kicked over by Peter. But yeah, the idea is you want to limit found sets, and if you can't limit it, then you have the server has to do it, and even then you're going to want to probably have the server do it for you every hour or something like that and update the numbers. So when you come to the chart, it's instantaneous, and the data might be an hour old or something like that, right? Does that make sense? So, I mean, for most people, if they're looking for financial numbers and stuff like that, they're, obviously the data doesn't change that much from hour to hour. I mean, I guess if you're Amazon, you're analyzing orders, I guess it would, but if you're an executive doing executive summary, the amount that you had sold up till 4 o'clock as opposed to what you sold up through 5 o'clock, I mean, you may not need that exact transient data. If you need that exact block, then you're obviously going to have to press the button and wait for it to happen. So anyway. And Elza says, yeah, it's kind of painful. So yeah, so that's where you have to cache this stuff. But first thing is to learn the skills, then to go back and watch our part about caching. But a cache, all it is a field, like a text or number field in a single record table, like a preference table, right? Single record in there. You just write it in there, so then it's saved, it's cached, it's ready to go. So problem solved. Okay, any other final questions, folks? We have posted all 3 files here. Calvin has done a knockout job. I'm going to go ahead and switch back to screen mode. Calvin, you want to show your smiley face? So we're going to see you back here. I'm not seeing it on the calendar right now, but we have to work around. We're going to have to start our UFO watching, where people go out to Area 51 and they watch. They call fence sitters. They sit out there and beyond the fences and they wait for new stealth fighters, UFOs out in Area 51 to go flying around. They're actually called fence sitters. They sit out there and they write and blog and take pictures. So we're going to be fence sitting, watching for FileMaker 19, right? So with our binoculars, right, Calvin?
That's right. Fence sit on Patrick Henry Avenue.
That would be funny. We'd have to have have to go live. We have a live broadcast from Patrick Henry Avenue, right? So we're out here waiting for the arrival of FileMaker 19. Any sight of it? Nah, no, sir. Right? So that would be funny. We'll have to have a live broadcast from that location. That'd be funny. We'll have to work that out. It's not too far from here. They'd be like, they hear this messaging, and it's like, they hear this F, beep, beep. Carlton's out in the front parking lot. Beep. What does he want? Beep Carlton, right? Seriously, that would be the internal conversation. And they'd be like, what's he doing? He does a live stream. He does a live stream? That's what they would say. He does a live stream? Like, what are we talking about, right? So, anyway. That's so funny. All right, guys. Folks, ladies, gentlemen everywhere, David is there. David has one question. He slid in here at the last second. He says, why do you store into a line instead of the individual virtual fields? Is what he wrote.
Why do I store it into a line instead of the individual virtual fields?
That's what he exactly wrote.
It's not saved into. It's actually saved in a global variable. So if we look at the data viewer,
you have to switch to your screen as opposed to your beautiful face. Your face is very beautiful.
Don't you see it? Okay. So it's actually saved in a list. So here's my list, which is actually a JSON object, and then each of these rows, each of these fields is a calculation pointing to a point in this object. So if we look at this one, Richard Carlton, July 2017, it's looking for July 2017, Richard Carlton, values 23. And it's putting that in. And then there's no other values for July, so those are zeros. And then for November 2018, it's saying, okay, let's look at Costco, November 2018, and then Costco, and grabbing this value 100. So each of these fields is a calculation, a repeating calculation that looks at this, and based on the set column label and account the column label and the row label, it knows where it's pulling the data from in this object. So Richard, July 2017, they know the calculation knows it's pointing to this spot right here. And that's how it's pulling that data. So nothing's actually being stored. It's all unstored calculations running. If we go back to the pivot table and look here, the actual calculation is right here. And you'll see that we have 100 repetitions. So theoretically, if we had 100 data points, we could have, or 100 rows, we could do that. And so this we're grabbing the label and the row, and then we're telling to get JSON get element from our global, our saved list, and then this is pointing to that location, the column label and the row label, and then we are displaying it down here. So that's how we're pulling that data. If we saved it somewhere, well, if we had a really large data set and we would put that into a stored field that we would reference after we ran the script. In this case, because we're doing a lightweight example, we're just using a global variable. I think that answers the question. Is any follow-up to that?
No, I think everyone's heads has kind of exploded. So, and I think David, I'm watching David over here and his question, and the problem is he's on a solid minute or two behind where we're at. So, but yeah, basically at this point we're out of time. It's after 2 o'clock local time, so we're at this for about an hour and 4 minutes. So we want to just wrap up with any final announcements. Calvin, we'll be back to talk about SQL. If you have questions about what you've seen, you want some help or assistance or whatever, you have a comment, thought, whatever, just shoot us an email to support@RC Consulting. So once again, I'm going to pop back over here. And I'm going to say that if you want to leave feedback about this broadcast and you want people to see it, especially the folks at Claris, my recommendation would be to visit this website right here and write a review. Make sure you talk about FileMaker and how you're using it and what about the broadcast you liked or didn't like. And feel free to leave that information. And that way we can get that shared with other people. So I'm Richard Carlton here with Calvin Moseyman. And anything else, Calvin?
That's it. Looking forward to the Execute SQL session.
Yeah, but everyone better bring the caffeine for that, because that will blow everyone up. All right? I appreciate everyone. Thank you.
And the guys just stepped up the whole way. Calm, cool, collected the quarterback. Great read, good patience. More importantly, great job up front protecting this quarterback to give you a chance. And that's all you can ask for.
Trying to rally down 10. 9:25 to go here in the fourth. Short motion by Amendola from the left. Brady takes the shotgun snap. Stands in, throws it left for Amendola. Reaches up and snaps a high throw and lands inside the 10. Rolling to the 9. Ball slightly behind him, but then he makes the grab.